because of the other things that came to pass. But at the time, it was the one band I worked with that felt purely artistic. All other work was just work. For many years, a good 8 straight, from my first major label deal to the time Falcon came together in the early 2000s, I made my living as a drummer. Largely, this was with major label bands at a time when major labels still controlled the industry and there was money to be made off them, and there was no need to be your own publicist on social media or even worry about anything other than learning the parts and not being crazy. Of all the acts I worked with, though, Falcon is the one that has remained most a part of my life, if only because it helped bring about the end of my career. Before we get to the end, though, I must recount the band's origin story because it is remarkable. Falcon was not a cover band, yet our material was not original. What we played were the never-before-heard songs of a dead child songwriting prodigy. His name was Jared Falcon, and in the mid-'80s, Jared attended Petaluma Junior High in Petaluma, California, where one of his classmates was Shannon Ferguson, later the guitarist for the New York City band Longwave, with whom I played for a time. The legend goes that Jared played baritone sax in his middle school orchestra and didn't do very well as a student, but he was an exceptional songwriter, pinning a new song almost every day and recording each onto a Fisher-Price tape recorder. This practice started in January 1987 and ended 336 songs later in February 1988 when he died from spinal meningitis at age 14. Years later, on a visit home, Shannon found Jared's dusty pile of cassette tapes while helping Jared's mother clean out an old storage space, and he knew at once he'd struck gold. Upon his return to New York, Shannon set out to form the band that would bring Jared Falcon's songs to life, and thus Falcon was born. This story, of course, is not true. There was no Jared Falcon, and even his name, to my eyes, is an obvious fake. But after the band booked our first show at Pianos on Ludlow, on the Lower East Side, the club requested a bio, and I was tasked with writing the thing. I was the one, after all, who was taking fiction workshops up at Columbia and spending all my time in rehearsal reading The New Yorker. Everyone knew that writing was my thing. But while the stories I was turning in for workshop were still largely failures, I had recently started to find some success writing band biographies for groups around town. These are the who are they and where are they from statements that accompany almost anything promotional. From websites to club listings to press releases, you've seen them before. They all look the same. And though I was good at cranking them out, the cliched nature of the form. Here are the many adjectives describing the guitar tone: angular, crunchy, slinky. Here are the reasons it's the band's best work yet. This is the unique and cute place where the songs were written. This is why they're special. Had quickly grown stale for me. So for Falcon's bio, I decided to have some fun. And why not? There was nothing at stake. No one was paying me. The band had no label, no revenue, no fans, no real ambition that I knew of. We were just a side project. So I included our actual names in the bio, where we were from and the real groups we had a history of working with, but the rest I made up. The whole Jared Falcon thing, that was a joke. At best, I thought, the bio would be posted online and someone might laugh at it. Not for 1 second did I think anyone would ever actually believe it. Slowly, though, and then very quickly, I came to learn I was wrong. The first believer I met at Pianos. I was cutting through the crowd on my way to the stage when a hand gripped my shoulder. The hand was connected to a man named Mario, a martial arts instructor who had recently begun to date a friend of mine. I'd eaten dinner with Mario not too long before, and during the meal he spoke often about fighting with people. Fucking him up was a phrase he used repeatedly. I remember thinking my friend had probably made a poor decision about who to date, but I kept my opinion to myself. I didn't want to get involved, especially with this guy. He seemed like a dangerous meathead. So when I found him holding my shoulder that night at Pianos, I was both scared and surprised. I didn't peg him for liking arty indie rock. "Nick," he said, "I just want to say that what you're doing is beautiful, man." "What's that?" I said. Still scared of the fact that he was touching me. We hadn't even played a song yet. "About these songs, man. About that kid. took me a second to realize what Mario was talking about. That by that kid, he meant Jared Falcon, the human I had made up. Oh, I said, and started to laugh. But then it became clear to me that Mario wasn't joking. I could see it in his eyes. Truly, he believed. Oh, I said again, now ceasing my laughter as I tried to figure out just how I was going to tell this guy the truth. All those stories about people he fucked up started coming back to me, though, and I was stunned into a moment of silence. Finally, I just said, yeah, okay, thanks, man, and walked off, terrified of what I had done. On stage, I bent down beside our keyboard player, Jeff, who was setting up gear. Mario thought the bio was real, I whispered into his ear. I know, Jeff said. He told me he thought it was beautiful. Me too, I said, and we stared at each other wide-eyed, as if only just then discovering that the toy magic wand we've been playing with for weeks had been casting real spells the whole time. In the days that followed, we were all a bit spooked. Someone had another friend who believed too. There were a few of them, in fact. Neil, our singer, even told us that one person he knew had written a piece for a website called Gawker, about Falcon having, quote, the most complicated backstory in the world. Still, we all laughed. Gawker? Come on, this was 2003. The internet was still something I, for one, didn't take very seriously. When someone told me they had seen something online, I felt a touch of embarrassment for them, as if they were admitting to playing a video game. The possibility of invisibility still remained alive in our world. And in any case, fictional rock and roll backstories were a trick of the trade. War, Alice Cooper, Kiss, all basically cartoon characters. None of the Ramones were named Ramon. David Bowie was never an alien. So our own bit of fiction seemed to carry no stakes with it at all. Also, remember when the White Stripes were claiming that they were like, what? That they were brother and sister? I remember thinking about that when I wrote the bio that day. I was like, well, that's sort of funny. Something like that. Anyway, The Lost Falcon was just another entry in the long list of bands with fake origin stories. I heard a compelling piece about this trend once on NPR. It was a report about a band named Delicate Steve. The story was not about Delicate Steve's music, slightly precious instrumental rock, but rather about the band's bio, which was a complete lie dreamed up by the author Chuck Klosterman, about the group having been discovered in the parking lot of a strip mall. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of the report, though, was a digression into a 2006 study in which Michael Beckerman, then chair of the music department at NYU, played a piece of music for an audience inside of a German church. Half the audience was told that it was the work of a composer who, days after it was written, was sent to a concentration camp and killed. The other half learned only the composer's name. After the performance, the half that had not been told the story of the composer's death thought the music was sweet, lovely, and folksy. The others felt that this was one of the great tragic statements of the century. I wonder now if Falcon's story made us sound different to those who believed. If, as we played our songs that night at pianos, Mario heard not just the music of four young men in t-shirts up there on stage, but also the ghost of Jared Falcon in the room with us, singing into a Fisher-Price tape recorder. If he did, though, that wasn't my intention. I didn't set out to change the way people experienced our music. All I was trying to do was the one thing I've been struggling to achieve in the rest of my life, which was to write a story that worked. The first story I wrote, first real story, not including childhood riffs on knights and superheroes and Dungeons and Dragons, was about a man listening to a cassette tape of himself saying the same word over and over. At the end of the piece, the tape pops out of the deck. We never learn what word the man is saying. The story was called My Brother's Name is Carved into My Desk, a title that had nothing to do with the story content, and I wrote it in Bill Moore's 11th grade English class at Greensboro Day School in Greensboro, North Carolina. The story was not very good, but Mr. Moore was pretty great. He was tall and rangy and had a gray beard, even though he wasn't that old, and he wore cool glasses and played bass in a blues band and was a graduate of Columbia. I remember him drawing a triangle on the blackboard one afternoon and covering almost all of it in a sea of chalky ripples. He circled the tip of the triangle, the part rising above the fake water, and explained to us how Hemingway's iceberg principle worked. That you need only see the tip of something to understand all that's hidden beneath. I felt like what he had just shown me was something much larger than the tip of an iceberg, though. I felt he'd shown me the tip of a new world. Mr. Moore made everyone in that class subscribe to the New Yorker, explaining that we'd be reading the magazine all semester long because it held the country's best writing. He built up the classic myth around the magazine, telling us all about its editors, about its writers. We never discussed any of the New Yorker's longer pieces, though. All we read was the talk of the town. This is the section at the front of the magazine, which is, the short character profiles, vignettes, and anecdotes about city life. Each is a gem in detail, precision, and as a professor, I use them in my own classroom from time to time. Aside from the craft of these pieces, though, what the Talk of the Town really provided for those of us in Mr. Moore's English classroom was a promise of life beyond Greensboro. It was like a map pointing us toward all the parts of the world's iceberg that we couldn't yet see. The huge and important things looming out there, submerged in the depths, just waiting for us to discover them. Once our student subscription ran out at the end of the semester, though, I was left high and dry. I missed the circus buzz I got from those readings, imagining I was elsewhere and cultured and cosmopolitan. So I began reading James Joyce just to say I was reading James Joyce. I bought a collection of Poe simply because the book was so thick at News and Novels. Do you remember News and Novels?
Dad worked there.
Yes. And then one afternoon when driving along Mendenhall Street in Greensboro, on my way to meet my friend Bryce at Cup of Joe on Tate Street, I saw a pile of New Yorkers standing on a curb and slammed on my brakes. This was the summer of 1994, when I was 17. I just shaved my head, left a long ponytail I'd worn for years behind the floor of my friend's apartment. Even the warm summer air through the open windows of my red Carmangia felt cold against my newly bare scalp. The whole world felt fresh. I was primed to become someone new. I turned my car around and pulled up beside the discarded New Yorkers, which I shoveled onto the sizzling black vinyl passenger seat. The address on the top issue revealed the subscriber to be a man named Bill Morris, and at once I recognized the name. Bill Morris was the only novelist I knew of who lived in Greensboro. Ignore the fact his name is almost exactly the same as Bill Moore, which was my English teacher, and they lived on the same side of the street, on that street like one block apart. In any case, he was a novelist, he lived in Greensboro, he drove a big vintage Cadillac convertible, and I'd seen him around town, driving to be seen. I thought he looked cool. The fact that I was retrieving the reading material of an honest-to-God novelist only confirmed what I had already suspected, that this was the most important magazine in the world. At home, I stacked Bill Morris's New Yorkers to the right of my desk and worked through them all summer long, imagining as I did so that I was a refined man of letters, a man in New York, a writer perhaps, and one who always turned first to the talk of the town. A week or two after the Falcon show at Pianos, I received a phone call in my apartment. There were no cell phones in my life at this time, so I always answered the phone. It was my prime source of work. The person on the other end was not a musician calling to hire me for a session, though. It was a writer, a man who I will call William. I'd met William a few times in person, but I'd known who he was before that. He'd once been the editor of a major music magazine, Rolling Stone, had written 2 books, neither of which I'd read, but both of which were cited as definitive. He'd also published a profile of a band that I liked in the New Yorker recently, and I'd read it and thought it was great. So getting a phone call from William was much more exciting for me than any musician. For me, this was a real star. We spoke for a moment or two about nothing. It was just small talk, and I found myself wondering, hoping really, that perhaps William was calling to invite me to a party. Or maybe he did have work for me. Maybe one of the musicians he'd recently profiled needed a drummer. Whatever the reason, the mystery was intoxicating. So when he finally said, "Well, I'm calling because I have good news," the tension became almost unbearable. "Yes," I said, on the edge of my junky love seat. And then William said something that shot right past my desire for an invitation to a party or a new gig and landed deep, deep within me. in the neediest and most tender parts of my soul. Because what he said next was, the New Yorker just green-lighted me to write a talk of the town piece about your new band. I pressed my face against the door jamb in shock. The talk of the town? This was too good to be true. Oh my God, I said, but what band? This was a period when I was playing with several new acts at any one time, so it wasn't quite clear. About Falcon, William said. About that incredible story. And then time slowed to a halt. I felt each breath as it came in and out of me. I was even aware of my awareness, thinking about how I was thinking about each breath, and about how the silence now stretching out over the phone line was growing longer and longer. It was a moment of great importance in my life, I felt. One where a certain dream had been extended to me, as if on a platter, and yet I could not accept it. Not like this. Well, I said, guilt coursing within me. I couldn't believe I'd just put this man in such a position. That story is pretty incredible, huh? What are you saying, William said. I'm saying that story is pretty incredible. Wait. He paused, decoding my message. Are you saying Jared Falcon isn't real? All I'm saying is that story's pretty incredible. Okay, he said. You got it now. Well, what I will say is that the New Yorker has excellent fact checkers. So whatever the truth is, it will come out. I could tell he was thinking out loud here, just trying to find some way to salvage the article. Because even for him, a talk of the town piece would have been a good assignment. Look, he finally said, don't say anything else. I still might be able to do this. I'll make it a part of the story. It could even make it more interesting. It was like he was talking to himself, like as if I wasn't even there. I want to come to your show at the Luna Lounge. We'll do an interview beforehand. Okay, I said. And in a blur, we arranged where we would meet. After we hung up, I sat down in a stupor. Gingerly, I touched my forehead. There was an indention on it, left there from when I'd been pressing myself against the door jamb so firmly. The setting sun had fallen between the two buildings outside the window beside me, and its orange light poured into the room. Guilt still coursed through me, but a growing fear had now joined it as well. Was there an advocacy group for survivors of meningitis that might retaliate after I had so carelessly leveraged their trauma? Or some other offended party, one I didn't yet know of? It all seemed possible, and I was afraid of it. There was another emotion at work in me too, though. It was stronger than my guilt or my fear. Because despite the wild mess I'd just made, despite the fact I'd lied to the world and unwittingly fooled a man I respected and put all of us in the most uncomfortable of positions imaginable, the New Yorker had still just called because of a story I'd written. And it was a story they thought was incredible. So more than anything, what I felt at that moment was pride. A week later, we met at Mac's Fish. A large tape recorder rested on the table between us. Still can't believe we did this. William sat with his back to a door that was filled with bright light, so his form was only an outline. So how'd you meet Jared, he said, pressing record. Shannon and Neil gave the answers. They'd agreed beforehand to base all responses on the kid they'd both known growing up. So whatever they'd say would line up. And incredibly, it seemed to be working. Everything they said sounded true. Still, William knew we were lying. And we knew that he knew we were lying. And so the whole thing proceeded like some type of torture. It lasted only a half hour or so, but it felt much longer than that. In fear, I saw William in the audience later, standing near the front of the stage. And afterward, Abby, my then girlfriend, told me she'd talked with him. I asked him how the interview had gone, she said. And he said, this is going to ruin my writing career. In the weeks that followed, I checked my mailbox with increasing anxiety. Each new issue of the New Yorker arrived like a possible bomb. Still, nothing about us appeared in it. In the meantime, the Village Voice ran a short profile. In the history of concept records, Brooklyn band Falcon has quite a fantastical doozy. Entertainment Weekly did a small piece on us in which we were, quote, marvelously dreamy. I performed live on WFMU with another act. And while there, the DJ interviewed me, the hired drummer of another act about Jared Falcon. And yes, even NPR, the very station that ran the piece about the existence of fake band biographies, aired a segment about Falcon's backstory, reporting on how Jared Falcon managed to write and record more than 300 songs in the late 80s on a shoddy tape recorder. The band has recovered those old tapes, they said, and plays as a tribute band to an artist whose music never made it past living room cassettes. Still online. I gave up looking for the talk of the town piece, though. Over time, it just became clear that it wouldn't happen. And for a long time after that, I couldn't even read the New Yorker. It's like my actions had sullied its pages. Many times I thought about reaching out to William to apologize for having put him in such an awkward position and ask him what had become of it all, but my guilt remained too potent to act. Not until a decade later, not until I was writing the very first draft of this essay did I email him to ask. Didn't write anything, he said. Didn't even transcribe the interview. The band was unknown, so it wasn't interesting to discuss the hoax. Hoax. Even now, the word burns. I didn't set out to mislead. I didn't try to create fake news. I just wrote a story about a dead boy's songs and was surprised when people widely believed it. And though I guess it isn't news that a good story can be hard to resist, maybe the most surprising aspect of this whole fiasco was the story about myself that arose from it. And it was one that I couldn't resist either. In this story, I no longer had to show up to a recording session only to learn that the project was a Christian rock album or a LensCrafters jingle. In this story, I no longer had to carry my drums up 5 flights of stairs every night at 3 in the morning. In this story, I made my own artistic decisions and ceased being only a sideman. Because in this story, I was no longer a drummer. What I was a writer. And that fictional bio about Jared Falcon was my first success. I didn't quite see it that way then, though, not exactly. This is only a narrative I'm piecing together now from my comfortable perch in the future. I didn't know then that I would soon apply to graduate schools for writing and get a fellowship to the one that people said was the best. Or that then, when I moved to Iowa to attend that program, I would be tolling the ultimate death knell for my music career. All I knew was that I had written a story that people found compelling. And because of it, I found enough confidence to keep writing more stories, hoping another would click. When I think about Falcon today, though, what comes to mind most vividly is not how the band marked the end of my music career. Instead, what I think of is one specific moment, near the end of my time in New York, when we were all in rehearsal. This was just before I left for Iowa. We were arranging a new song on this day, and during the verses, I wasn't playing the standard rock and roll backbeat, but rather something more orchestral and spare. This was one of the great assets of this band. Our arrangements were dynamic, unusual, and built around open space. In each measure, my whole part was only 3/16 notes on the floor tom, 2 short pickup notes leading to the one of the next measure, da-da-dum. Shannon, who was playing bass on the song, and attempting to play those notes simultaneously with me, kept inverting the phrase and playing 3/16 notes, 16th notes trailing after the one, dum-da-da-da. This meant we only played 1 note together in the middle. As the afternoon continued, Shannon kept struggling to figure it out, shaking his head at the simplicity of the part and the weird mental block, keeping him from getting it right, until, for some reason, we had a shared epiphany. His error was not an error at all. The phrase we had accidentally constructed was in fact the most perfect part of all. My notes leading into his, a basic call and response. I've had creative explosions like this in the past, but never again did I have one as pure or exciting. At least not in my music, in my music career. I'm a writer now. I work alone. For the most part, I don't miss playing the drums, but I do miss that moment. I miss the rush of shared recognition, of constructing something beautiful by accident and having it change the course of what we were doing. It was like we'd accidentally brought something to life in the room with us, and we're suddenly hearing it there for the first time, like it had a loud and very weird heartbeat, one that shouldn't have worked, but it did, going da-da-dum-da-da-da. This was the part of the song, it seemed to be saying, of all the parts of the song that was most true. And even though we just made it up, pulling it out of thin air without even meaning to. It was impossible not to believe in it. Thank you. So that's the legend of Mac's going to come up now and quiz me. No, I'm going to quiz him on all Athenaeum drum parts. Yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah, Falcon. You can hear those. You can hear that song. Yeah, it just because of the streaming thing. It's Falcon with an exclamation point now. If you want to find it, because there are like a million Falcons, and we got a cease and desist letter from one of them. Who's a rapper. But there are a lot of Falcons. I'm putting this down and getting my water.
Yeah.
Have you ever used a microphone?
I have. I don't normally have to turn them on myself. They're already on. The book is great.
Thank you, Mac. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
I know you're talking, but he texted me this morning to tell me he was listening to Athenaeum, and I started, when Mac texts you that he's listening to your high school band, it's just there's a lot. Anyway,
it's crazy that it was your high school band because it sounds very professional. Like my band Super Chunk recorded our first album at the same place where you guys made your first record.
Wow, Jerry Key's place.
Jerry Key's studio, and when it was in his house in Raleigh on Bickett Street. And our record sounds like it was our first record. Your record sounds like a professional record that you might hear on the radio.
I had nothing. That was Mark.
And I was trying to understand how you did that right out of the gate.
Well, honestly, John Plymouth produced that, and so that was part of it. But also the singer of Athenaeum, who a lot of you know, Mark McCaughan, who I met when I was in 8th grade, he was incredibly talented. He should have been a producer, really. He had an ear for that exact thing you're talking about, and just like what he did from the second we started playing together in a playroom in 8th grade, it sounded real. And so, I did not have the ear that he had for all that stuff. He and John Plymouth together made that sound happen.
Well, Plymouth, a lot of you will probably know John Plymouth as well, but when I was in high school, I would go see John Plymouth's band a lot, the Pressure Boys, and they were very inspirational.
Oh, well, the Sex Police for me was what I imprinted.
And then we made a lot of records with John Plymouth as well, and I knew that he had worked with y'all. But anyway, the first Athenaeum record does not sound like anyone's first record. Certainly not a high school band's record.
Yeah.
The main thing that I took away from this, and you kind of start with it on the very first page of the book, is that being in a band is embarrassing.
It's so embarrassing.
It's embarrassing when you're in the band, and then you're talking about in this book for the most part, it's embarrassing talking about it later.
It's like there's a no-win thing in conversation. Like if somebody says, Mac's in a band, like they've either never heard of your band, right? And then you have to be like, whoa, it's sort of a big deal. Or they're a super fan, which is weird. Maybe.
Or it's like your parents, and they're like, what's going on with the band?
Yeah.
And then
right.
It's just embarrassing.
This is not confined just to bands, though. I mean, which I'm realizing now that people are starting to read this. I had a conversation with my friend Bryce, who shows up in this book a lot, and he's been a blue man for 27 years. And he's like, Nick, I read your book, and it's about me. That thing where it's so awesome, and you realize you're at a dinner party, you're like, yeah, I'm a blue man. So, but yeah. So, my question for you though is you have the cover of I was gonna say of Merge, right? So the dinner party cover, so you could be like, well, I operate a record label. I'm a music executive.
No, you can't say you have a record label because then people think that you literally make the records.
Okay.
Either you have a recording studio or you have a pressing plant, but you don't have either. You just have an office, which is hard to explain, but that's what a record label is. It's just an office.
Well,
that's boring.
Do you think that the conversation is easier being a singer than being a drummer because of the plethora of drummer jokes?
I mean, that's a good. If you're having to explain your band, those people probably don't know about drummer jokes. Only people in bands really know about drummer jokes,
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
I'm gonna say.
I mean, I don't know. As a drummer, I feel the gaze sort of lower. They're like, oh, you're a drummer.
It's interesting that your friend is embarrassed about being a Blue Man because we played a show with the Blue Man group one time.
Yeah.
It was an outdoor festival in Boston on Fenway. Like they had like the
Oh, Bryce
modern
Blue Man, and he was probably there.
the
He
modern rock radio station sponsored this concert, and the Blue Man group was the headliners basically, and I was psyched to be on a show with the Blue Man group.
Well, right, because the embarrassment is ours. It's not about the other.
Right.
Yeah. But
Well, so about this embarrassment and the way you talk about it in here, it's very, it really hits home. But also, I feel like you were thinking about this long before most people who were in bands. Like you were, I mean, when we were just like playing shows and stuff like that, you were like thinking. You're so in your head, even like when you were first in bands.
yeah.
And to the point where you talk about getting to a point where you start hitting the drums too hard, and you know you're doing it, but you can't stop doing it, and it messes up your playing, and it's like you're trying to get kicked out of your own band kind of by doing it.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way.
But
Yeah,
I mean that's kind of what it sounds like. But I guess I'm just saying, like, you recognize it at the time that you were doing it, and it just sounds like from the minute you were in bands, you were like thinking so much about what you were doing. Whereas I think most of us were just like, we're in a band, we're just like going to play a show in West Virginia or whatever, like as opposed to like, what am I doing? Do I want to be doing this?
Right. I had this.
You were more analytical and self reflective, I think, than a lot of people in bands who were 19 years old or whatever.
Maybe. I mean, I had an incredible drum teacher when I was young, who I wrote about, who I really imprinted on, and he was like Pete. And he was a great jazz drummer, and he could have cared less about rock music, and there was nothing worse than Pete coming to watch me play an Athenaeum show where I'm like, and it's just like, and I really do think that was the start of that, where I started thinking about like the worth of different genres. Do they have different weight? Is one better than another? And am I embarrassed playing? A lot of the time I was. Now, at that point when I was young, I was definitely way more thrilled to be playing than I ever was embarrassed, But yeah, that shift happened. And it's interesting you brought up the hitting the drums thing. Yeah, thank you. I never thought about it as playing it so hard that I was getting myself kicked out of the band. But now that you mention it, I do remember thinking all the time, like, is Mark gonna kick me out of the band? Like, because I would hit so hard, and the whole show would be like, slow down, speed up. Like I didn't even know what I was doing afterwards. I'd be like, yeah, he's gonna kick me out. He's gonna have to have the talk with me.
Right.
And yeah, maybe this like therapy now.
Because it didn't seem like you did that in the bands after, like when you were playing with other people after
No,
that. You didn't.
I
have
hit
that.
really hard, but it wasn't like I write in here with Athenaeum. I got to the point where I'd fallen out of love with the music a bit. Athenaeum was the first band that I was in. And I, technically am a good drummer. And there was a thing then too, where like you didn't want to be a light hitting drummer. You'd see a band and they're not very good. And you're like, oh, the drummer, he's a light hitter. Which of course like doesn't really mean, it was like a 90s thing, And I could hit the drums super hard, and I started doing it. People were like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But then,
You got a good response, so you're like, oh,
right.
okay.
But it was screwing up the music. But that was my thing, and since I wasn't really in love with the music as much anymore, it's like, well, I'm just going to be the most incredibly hard-hitting drummer, which is just stupid. Totally stupid, which I realized. But then, yeah, soon Alec Farrell is here, who played in a band called Skeleton Key with me in New York, which was an incredible band. Soon, the moment I started playing with Alec, all that stuff went away just because it was all just wrapped up in that mix.
Well, you talk about being very sincere.
Yeah.
At least in Athenaeum.
Yeah.
And as we were texting today, like it was slightly against the zeitgeist of the time, but I realized like it was not really against the zeitgeist of your time because you're younger, and so by the time you guys were making records, things had kind of moved on from the early 90s, I would say.
Yeah.
And so, but I feel like that part of you leaving that band, it feels like, and playing with other people like Skeleton Key, was like not losing sincerity, but just having a different attitude about what you were doing and like what was valuable in the music that you were playing.
Absolutely.
And was that just like leaving Athenaeum? Was it living in Chapel Hill? Was it living in New York? Like, what do you think like changed your kind of perspective on things?
Moving to Chapel Hill, I fell in love with John Gillespie's tape that John Gillespie had, and then started coming to Chapel Hill to see him. And it was just like, I was in high school in Greensboro, and so you guys know, like coming to Chapel Hill was awesome. I was like, oh my gosh, the center of the cultural world.
Just a different scene.
Yeah, and then I moved here, and at first, Athenaeum was my world, and it was awesome. And then, our world was smaller then because of the internet not existing, and I just got exposed to a lot of music that was exciting for reasons that weren't about the integrity of songwriting or the quality of the sound of an instrument or the craft of songwriting, which has worth. Those are, the things I mentioned have absolute worth and, stand the test of time. But that other stuff is exciting too. And that's what I got into here. And I was also, I was 19.
Just like an energy or something that's like different.
And I was the right age, it's like, that was me going to college. I didn't go to college for quite a while, but moving here and like, hearing your records and like stuff that I would learn from John, Stephen and stuff, like that excited me to the other things, which was hard to come to terms with, because it's like a love affair falling apart and you don't want it,
right?
But you can't help it.
But you're just falling in love with something different.
Yeah. Well, tell that to somebody who's like leaving their wife.
Right.
It's fine. You know what I mean? Like, so.
Luckily, you weren't married to anyone in Athens.
No, but I mean, we all got along great, is what I'm saying. It wasn't like, Mark, I fucking hate you, man. Like, we never had that moment ever. We're still in touch all the time. It was like, it was just taste.
One thing that I think is interesting is that first I wanted to ask about Pete. Is Pete still around?
I don't know. I've tried to find him, and I haven't been able to get in touch with him.
He was the drum teacher.
Yeah, he taught at Greensboro College for a while, and I emailed him when the book was coming together. I haven't been able to get in touch with him.
He seemed like a super interesting person.
Yeah. As
the book goes along, and eventually, spoiler alert, there is a band reunion. And as you're approaching that, you talk about having never listened to the lyrics.
Yeah, man.
Which I think, as a writer,
I know.
You're just like, I'm a writer. You guys that write lyrics are like, that's not really writing.
No,
that's not the kind of writing that I'm trying to do. That's just you and your words for your songs.
It is. I can't hear the lyrics to songs. I mean, I really can't. They call it lyric deafness, right? I mean, whether that's a thing or not, but it's like listening to. I mean, I know that the lyrics are there.
That.
Well, other people have coined that phrase, but it's like the music sort of scrambles my brain. And so like I know the lyrics are there, but when I'm trying to focus on them, when you look at the night sky and you see stars in the periphery, and then you look at them and they're gone, like that's what happens when I try to focus on lyrics. And I thought this was just me. And since I've written this book, several people, mostly drummers, and particularly a few drummers who are writers, Michael Azerrad was like, same exact thing. Like, I cannot hear, he's a wonderful writer. In fact, he's the New Yorker writer that I gave the alias to in the article. And he's a great drummer too, and he's like, it felt like he was admitting it to me. He's like, I've never been able to hear the lyrics to any songs. Another guy just got in touch the other day. But it's because I can't sing, I think. And for me, lyrics are like, that's like your instrument. in your delivery.
Well, I can't hear the drum beats, so that's sorry. That's just the thing. I have drum deafness.
But you know, I did this exercise for the book where I tried to learn the lyrics. I listened to Athenaeum's, hit song and like tried to learn the lyrics, and I was like, Mark, that's pretty good. Mark wrote those lyrics. They're fine. It's like workman. They're like specific. There's a good song.
Yeah.
Which was cool. And I also realized I know the lyrics. It was like, I say it's like translating. I knew where all the breaths were. I knew the sound. I was just translating what they meant. It's a song about a breakup.
That was just very interesting to me because you're playing along night after night, and obviously you're in touch with like the feeling of the song,
right?
Because otherwise you wouldn't be playing it well. It wouldn't
Sure.
sound good. So the fact that you could be in touch with that aspect of it without really knowing like what the words were, it's cool.
Yeah. Well, do you feel like when you're playing with the drummer that they're thinking about like they're rocking because of the emotional angst of it?
No, but if someone was playing with a total wrong vibe, you would be like, that's
right.
not really how this goes.
I still haven't gotten to the bottom of it, and I didn't really know it was an issue until my daughter started reciting the lyrics to every song immediately with absolute ease, and I was like a human can do that?
Kids are really good at remembering
Frances,
many lyrics.
she gets it immediately. But I have a question for you that I've been thinking about because a lot of this book for me is about the transition from being a drummer and a sideman who is working in a lot of ways with other people's artistic projects. And the thrill of like, I never wanted to be a front man, but being a writer is sort of like being a front man because the project is mine. I own it artistically. I don't have to convince other people to get on board. And like, your identity is so much about not having to answer to anybody artistically. You own the label. You write the songs, and I like it. I wonder if you're ever tempted by the role of a sideman. Like, do you ever have?
Oh yeah,
really?
I love playing. I love collaborating with people.
Yeah.
And specifically not having to write words or sing actually. So the few times that I've been able to, I did a whole tour with Yola Tango where I was just playing vibes.
Oh, that's cool.
And some keyboards, like not my, and they knew that was not my instrument, but I could do it well enough. Was great.
Yeah.
And just having to like learn someone else's songs and make them sound like they want them to sound, and then and this band is also very improvisational, so the encore is usually like 3 or 4 songs that we had never played before.
Really?
Yeah. And so I really enjoy that collaboration.
Did you have to take like a vibe solo?
No solos per se, I don't think. Maybe some keyboard, maybe some organ solos, yeah.
Cool.
But no, so I really do enjoy collaborating and playing with other people and not singing and being the front person or whatever, but that's not my main thing.
Well, and you're a visual artist, right? I mean, you paint, make prints that are great. Are you ever like tempted to jump ship and just like?
That's weird because doing drawings or making prints always comes from like an assignment, like we need a record cover, or like I'm not someone who's driven, which I think you kind of have to be a visual artist who's like, I'm just gonna spend 8 hours in the studio just like painting or drawing, or like I'm not someone who's like, I have to have a notebook with me to do drawing everywhere I go. I don't feel driven in that way. Whereas like I do feel like most days I could just go in the studio and mess around, like whether I'm actually writing a song or just playing drums even, or playing some other instrument, or just, I wish I had more time for that.
Yeah.
But I don't really feel that way about visual art.
Well, we should see if anybody has a
Sure.
question, because these things get horrible if they go on forever. Are there, or am I cutting you off?
Nope.
Sure you want to ask me?
No.
Are there any questions that anybody out there wants to ask either me or Mac? I mean, I got him here. I convinced him to come do this thing. So, any questions about the book? Or
One thing I'll say while you're formulating your questions. One thing that's embarrassing about being in a band is that, and journalists who should know better ask this all the time, like, what's some like crazy story from the road? What's some crazy story from the road?
I knew he was going to say that. I knew exactly that.
For at least like our band and seemingly your bands, there are no crazy stories from the road. Like there's hilarious stories like you have in here, but they're about like not having a sleeping bag.
That's exactly.
Just like that people have an idea about what being in a band is like, and what's embarrassing is having to break the news.
Amen. I know that I just asked for other good, but yeah, I mean my explanation is like if 4 young people, 3, 4, 5, are going to get together and essentially start a business that's difficult to have success in, like they're not going to be snorting a bunch of coke and getting arrested. They're probably going to be like hardworking nerds. You know, and so like, yeah, the craziest thing question is horrible.
If you want to know what the craziest thing is, just read Kid Congo Power's memoir that came out recently.
I'm sure that's more thrilling.
And it's like, I think all the crazy stuff happened in the 70s and 80s.
I agree.
And it all happened to him.
Yeah, I pointed at Darren, because Darren, I remember him explaining that to me once, that the idea of that like rock god is a little bit behind us. Okay, are there any questions that anybody has? No? I should ask questions of you. Yes, Deborah.
I love that you know Claire Danes.
Well,
I love her.
yeah.
So, are you still talking?
She went straight to the chase. Well, I would take issue at saying that I know her. I played with Vin Lee for a while, and he was her boyfriend. I mean, and we rehearsed in her living room, and I used her drum set. So I spent quite a bit of time in her living room, and she was super nice. But no, I mean, like, I think if Claire Danes came in right now, we were like, hey, Claire, like, she would have no idea who I was. If I said, like, I was Ben's drummer, then she'd be like, oh, yeah, okay. But she wouldn't, like, she's not checking out the new Nic Brown book. But, I did.
You don't know that.
I don't know that. I don't. I mean, oh.
What about
I'm thinking of the last time I saw her. I was never comfortable around her. You know, I was never like, what's up, Claire? And I remember there was a show, and she was there, you know, and like, there were just a lot of like sort of famous people who seemed cool, and I was getting ready to play the drums. And she came up and like gave me a hug, and like her face was real close to mine. And I was like, what are you doing? She's like, oh, I was just like kissing your cheek. I was like, okay. It was like the most awkward interaction. I was like, it was the least cool you could have been with Claire Danes. And that was the last time I saw her. Thank you for asking. But she and Ben, like, I did feel uncomfortable around them because they seemed sort of famous, but they were totally normal. They were cool.
But you're much tighter with Ione now, right? You go hang with Ben and Ione.
No, but Ben Lee's now married to Ione Skye, who is the actress in Say Anything. You know. But I did send that chapter to Ben Lee for him to read to make sure that, like, you know, I was trying to be responsible, but I did not send it to Claire Danes. She wouldn't have read it. Yeah, John.
Oh, it sounds like you're really happy with all the changes, moving from being a musician to being a writer, but and just having been a musician most of my life, I really value the social aspect of it, because otherwise I would just stay at home with my cats all the time. So do you ever miss that sort of compulsory socialization of being in a band? You're just like, you're going to be with people, and I mean, do you ever miss that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it helps that I'm a professor, you know, and that I teach creative writing, because, like, I have to go talk about art with people, you know, but it's a different collaboration than playing music. And I do miss that. And usually I forget that I miss it until it happens somehow. And I like how you put the sort of forced collaboration because, you know, especially as a writer, like I'm supposed to stay home with the cat, you know? So like, I don't play drums that much. Although I will say, and this is really weird, you know, I haven't been playing much at all, and I play drums by the laundry, you know, there's in the basement. And I was looking at the drums maybe 3 weeks ago, and they're a mess. There's stuff broken on them from shows in like 1999 that I sort of fixed, and it's like, I'm a grown man, like I can buy new drums. I need new drums. And then I looked at new drums, and I was like, I don't need to buy new. I'm just gonna clean my drums, and I took them all apart and started cleaning them. It's wildly satisfying. But then, you know, these reading dates were coming up. I was going to leave town, and so I started rushing to finish cleaning my drums before the book came out. And it was like, you know, it's like I'm rushing to make my drums perfect to now go perform a show without that. You know, it's like dressing up a mannequin in a gown and saying like, goodbye, beloved, I'm going to the ball. You know, so like the drums are perfect now. Something psychologically weird is going on. But they sound great. But yeah, I do miss them. Yeah, Alec?
The Jared Falcon story and how its impact and how it's followed you through your career now as a professor, in talking to first-timer, starting out writers, do you warn, and to that point, do you think back on maybe he disappeared rather than died? Do you warn against fridging your protagonists to new writers?
No.
Good.
Because I feel like new writers they need the opposite of being warned. You know what I mean? I'm like, write, steal. Like, you read something that's cool, plagiarize it. Steal anything, like anything to make it exciting, you know? And then I'm like, well, don't really plagiarize. But, you know, like, I'm just trying to find ways to pump them up, you know? But, like, then if somebody was like, you know, with early writers, you want them to write towards their weaknesses. And then when they get better, they get them to write toward their strengths. Oh, that's really good, do that. And then as they get better, I start getting them to push them towards their weaknesses. So like, maybe if somebody was really good, they were doing something weird, killing a bunch of characters, like maybe don't do that.
I mean, that story is insane, by the way. But it also there is a thing in the music industry where most music journalists are so lazy that like whatever you write, whatever you write in your band's bio or like the promotional materials that you send out with any record, every review article, anything is just going to be like they're just like looking at that and just copying it down to the point where it doesn't matter. Like it could be as insane as this. We had our drummer John, who's hilarious, write. You know, like this was like our 6th or 7th record. We're just someone think of something to say about this record. And John's like, oh, I'll write it. We're like, okay, this will be funny. So he wrote this thing just full of lies, including the statement that all the songs were written on an 18th century steam organ. And sure enough, every interview we did on that tour was like, so you guys wrote these songs on like a steam organ? And we're just like, we just assumed that everyone would know that was a joke. But no, everyone just believes it and just like regurgitates it. It's crazy.
Truly. In fact,
crazy.
I was specifically inspired by that. My friend Drip is back here, and he's a tennis player, and he did a series of fake interviews trying to just the dumbest lies possible, right? And fast forward to him making it to the semifinals of the U.S. Open in tennis, in doubles, and Patrick McEnroe's calling the match on CBS, and the camera cuts to Tripp's dad in the crowd. They're going, there's O.T. Phillips, linebacker for the 1978 Redskins, which is like absolutely not true. And I was like, that's the best thing I've ever heard. You know, like I'm just going to lie like Tripp did. So it's your fault.
I'll take that.
That was amazing. And I was sitting beside his dad. His dad's like, we got to get out of here. So, are they going to come get me? Ryan, were you?
Oh yeah. The embarrassment that came on from playing music. Has it ever come on as a writer?
Well, yeah. I mean, I quote Elizabeth Bishop in the prologue of the book. She's quoted. She's a famous poet. She said, "There's nothing more embarrassing than being a poet, which I get, you know, but like try being a drummer, you know? I mean, everything, you know, whatever you do, there's embarrassing things, but I have the cover now of being a professor. So like if I'm on a flight, you know, somebody says, what do you do? I'm not gonna say like, I'm a wordsmith, you know, like I'm a professor, and that's like, I don't know, it's a more comfortable, you know what I mean? So, but yeah, a little bit, but the difference is whatever I'm writing is my artistic project. Yeah. And I do feel different about that. You know, sometimes when you're the drummer on a thing that you're not into, that's more embarrassing than writing a weird book that you're like, I don't know, like I like my weird book, even if you don't.
I think that the other thing though about the embarrassment of being in a band is that you're at the same time saying like, this is embarrassing, but you're also like, look at me, I'm on stage playing a song. Like you're asking for it at the same time you're being like, don't ask me about this, that's embarrassing.
God, that's so true.
So that's really the problem.
It's like 2% of people that are like our audience who are like, I get that it's embarrassing, but that was still cool, you know? Like, I just want to talk to Plymouth about music. He's like, all right, yeah, no, I love that crazy jingle you did, you know, like. Let's take maybe one more and then we can decamp to get a drink. If there is one more, we can just get out. Yeah.
So Nick, at one point in the book, when you are kind of struggling with, you know, you realize you don't love the music anymore, and you make the calls to the schools.
Oh, yeah.
What if it seemed it would almost just desperation? What if Columbia had not said what they said? Did you have a backup? I mean, did you know?
No, not at all. He's asking specifically, I when I was in high school, I got into like Princeton and Columbia and some other good schools and said no because I wanted to keep playing music and it worked. But then 5 years after the fact, I pulled out my old admission letter and like called trying to be cool. Hey, yeah, I'm just seeing if I can reapply. And I couldn't believe they were like, you're still enrolled.
That blew my mind.
Me too, man. I mean, I was calling to reapply, not even to like.
But you said I guess was it Princeton that said you had to retake the.
Princeton was like, you gotta take after 4 years, you gotta retake the SAT,
yeah.
and that's when I was like, oh, okay, I'm not going. So I don't know. You know, I probably would have just kept playing music, and then I would have gone to school here. You know, I would have just worked out a way to go to Carolina, I would think. Right. I guess I would have taken the SAT again. I don't know, but it wouldn't have been. It was sweet the way it worked out. Yeah.
You know what I remember from that time?
Oh no.
You said that one school said, yeah, Lauren goes here. Or
Oh
Lauren
yeah, that was
here.
it. That's exactly right. That's Columbia. Yeah.
We're talking to her.
I mean, that's the thing. At like those schools, like the drummer of Athenaeum, like okay, you know, like they got all sorts of more important people.
Here's Lauren Hill.
Yeah, Lauren Hill. Yeah, it's like the year, but oh yeah, it's crazy. All right, thank you guys for coming. Mac, thank you for doing this.
Thank you all for coming. Got plenty of books for sale if you haven't gotten a book yet.
Yeah.